Wives respond. Thank you, Sue. For those of you that do not follow my wife on Facebook, we have some news for you. New additions, we have chickens. Yes, applaud, yes. There's been discussion about getting chickens around our house for years, and I'm kind of the holdout. I'm like, you know where we live, don't you? We're kind of out here in the woods. There's a lot of critters out here. And I keep thinking, you know, I've seen foxes, coyotes, bobcats, raccoons. What other kind of critters are out there? There's rattlesnakes.
There's dragonflies.
Dragonflies. I don't think they're a big threat to the chickens, but you never know. Lots of hawks and owls. And just lots of critters that like to get their hands on those chickens. But we're really going on a journey with these chickens. So please pray for us. Pray for the chickens. You know, all these critters, think about all of them out there. Bears. We have not actually seen a bear, but our neighbors have. And then, you know, the next morning our trash can's knocked over. It's right up next to our house. So we know that there are bears there too. Weasels. Are there weasels in Florida? I don't know. There's otters. Otters are like water weasels. So speaking of weasels, remember Jacob? We talked about him last week. Little weasel. We talked about how he stole Esau, his brother. He stole his birthright by tricking him into trading it for a bowl of soup, right? And we talked about how he then steals the blessing that his father Isaac was going to give to Esau by tricking Isaac into thinking he was Esau, right? So this little weasel here, we now have the part of the story which is right after he steals the blessing from Esau. And Rebekah says, you got to get out of here because Esau says he's going to kill you. Which, like we said last week, siblings never do these kind of things, right? But you know, Esau threatens to kill Jacob. So in verse 11, it says he comes to a certain place. What he's doing here is he's leaving. He's going on his way to Padan Aram, which is where his uncle Laban lives. And he comes to this certain place. Presumably this place is kind of out in the middle of nowhere, because it doesn't give a name. Later on it does say at the end, yes, that its name previously was Luz, before he names it Bethel. But at first it doesn't even mention it, just he comes to this certain place, which kind of indicates that it's probably just kind of on the way somewhere. Read some commentator that kind of suggested maybe it was even kind of the ruins of a previous worship place or something. The fact that there are these stones there, and stones are used a lot in ancient Middle Eastern religion for like building altars and things like that. It talks about him using the stone as a pillow. Jacob's moving at this point in the story. After he tricks Isaac into thinking he's his brother Esau, and after Esau threatens to kill Jacob, they run out of there, and he kind of does have instructions to go to Laban, because his father Isaac says, go find a wife, but don't take one of these Canaanite women. We talked about that last week. Same thing that happened with Isaac and Rebekah. So sends him to Uncle Laban and says, hey, go find one of your cousins to marry. You know, I feel like I'm back in Eastern Kentucky again. It's like, oh, no, sorry. I'm from Kentucky, so I can say things like that, right? But, you know, that's because, as we talked about last week or the week before, in tribal societies, that was an important thing, to maintain that family lineage. And we also talked about the special qualities that this family seems to have. So that's what he does, and he's going to Laban to find one of his cousins to marry, basically. And his uncle Laban tricks him, because he deserves it, basically, and he ends up giving him the wrong daughter. after working for Laban for 7 years, this is another story, but Jacob works for Laban for 7 years to earn basically the right to marry one of his daughters, and then he gives him the wrong daughter. So Jacob gets kind of a taste of his own medicine with all the trickster stuff, except that he doesn't even notice that he gets the wrong daughter until after the wedding night. So maybe Jacob deserves it. But that's what happens. And in this episode here, we have what's called Jacob's ladder. It's referred to as Jacob's ladder or staircase. This is the stairway to heaven, right? Led Zeppelin would be proud. And it may have been a ramp. One commentator I read said that it may really, a ramp might be a better translation there. And I think that's really interesting because when I picture that ramp, I think, it even makes me think of like an escalator. And it's saying that the angels are going up and down this ramp or this staircase or ladder or whatever you're going to call it. And I picture them almost as having their briefcases, going up and down, going to work. Because that's what the angels are. They're messengers. They're messengers from God. That's what the word actually means, is messenger. And they're going up and down just kind of doing God's business. It's this vision where he's seeing that God is active in the world. God moves in the world constantly, up and down. And he's seeing this vision through a dream, by the way. So maybe we shouldn't focus on it too much because I have a lot of weird stuff happen in my dreams. But God gives a promise, which is kind of one of the more focal points. He says, and I'll repeat it here. God says, I am the Lord, the God of Abraham, your father, and the God of Isaac. The land on which you lie, I will give to you and to your offspring, and your offspring shall be like the dust of the earth, and you shall spread abroad to the west and to the east and to the north and to the south, and all the families of the earth shall be blessed in you and in your offspring. Know that I am with you and will keep you wherever you go and will bring you back to this land, for I will not leave you until I have done what I've promised. That's the promise that we've been hearing about for a while. Last few weeks, we talked about Abraham and Isaac and Rebekah and now Jacob. This promise that is being spread through Abraham's ancestors to be a blessing to the world. Jacob, though, the little weasel, right after this, and like the next verse, right after our reading, Jacob puts an if on this whole thing. Jacob says, if God will be with me and take care of me on my trip, then the Lord shall be my God. Good old Jacob, a little brat, still trying to cheat the system, trying to make sure he has an out. He wants it all to be on his terms instead of on God's terms. And the next part of the story, that's when Uncle Laban dupes him in this pretty ridiculous story about giving him the wrong daughter. And I think that's really set up to show the difference between the faithfulness of God, who keeps the promises, and the unfaithfulness of Laban, who doesn't even keep his promises to his own kin. But God will. Jacob names this place where he has this vision, the house of God, Bethel. The place that just seems to be kind of in the wilderness, somewhere in the middle of nowhere, in between actual destinations. And you ever been in those places where you're in between destinations? And have you ever encountered God there? We're such an A to B kind of people. We're going from spot to spot, and do we miss anything on the journey? So I'm going to tell a story that I may have told before, so you can throw things at me, but it's a powerful story, and I don't remember if I've said it before, but back when I was a college kid and working at the State Psychiatric Hospital in Kentucky, and I was working on a substance abuse unit, and one of my jobs when I was 20 years old is I was going out driving these vans full of addicts, AA meetings and going to Narcotics Anonymous meetings, taking them out on these 15-passenger vans that I had no idea how to drive, but I was out there driving them. And we'd go to these AA meetings, and it was one of those times when it was pretty powerful for me to encounter God at those AA meetings. That's really where I first started encountering God, was at those meetings, me sitting in those meetings. And I remember specifically being at one, there was a speaker meeting, and he was up there speaking, and he was talking about how he had to learn how to pray, to develop his spirituality, to develop his connection with God. And he said, there are days that I just don't know what to pray because life still stinks, even though I'm clean. And he says, there are days when I just roll out of bed, get on my knees and say, God, F you. Except he didn't say F. And then go on along his day. And as some of you guys kind of went, oh, like that. Some of the people there at the meeting did that too. And other ones went, yep. And here I was sitting there as, basically, a Buddhist philosophy major going, huh. And for some reason, that moment has stuck with me my whole life. Because it sounds like such an odd, sacrilegious, weird thing to do. Although if you read some of the Psalms, it almost goes there at times. And it was this powerful moment where I saw someone telling a story of how they're trying desperately to connect with God, and that's all they could get out. And it was just this powerful moment for me that happened along my journey where I saw, he didn't get struck by lightning or anything. He's trying desperately to find a line of communication. And sometimes in our brokenness, that's what we find. And that was definitely when I was journeying through my spirituality, through college, in this job that I had just started. And really encountered God in that moment. In a really weird moment that just sounded horrible and sacrilegious, right? Very irreverent, but powerful. The other day I was sitting, doing some prayer out in my little man cave that I have. And I have this bookshelf that was sitting right in front of me. And I kept kind of seeing this book out of the corner of my eye out of all these books that, maybe it's because it's bright red, I don't know. But I haven't read in 10 years, but something kept telling me to open the book. To pull it off the shelf and open it. And I did, and I came across this one particular story that I think I'm actually just going to read to you because it's a powerful story. And, this is a story. This is a book by Ram Dass and Paul Gorman. So Ram Dass is kind of a spiritual leader and self-help guru, right? And the book is called How Can I Help? Stories and Reflections on Service. I'm going to tell you a little story here. I visited the wife of the former American ambassador in Thailand, and she told me about a monk who had built a monastery in which heroin and opium addicts were cured in 10 days. For $15. These kinds of statistics are unheard of in the West. Possibly, this was one of these monks who had meditation powers. I prevailed on her to take me to meet him. The monk had previously been a Thai narc, something like our federal drug enforcement agency. He had an aunt who I was told was a Buddhist saint, whatever that means. One day, she apparently said to him while he was still a narc, "What are you doing? If you don't watch out, you're going to end up killing people in this job. Why don't you help these people instead of hurting them?" He said that he didn't know how. She apparently told him to clean up his act, and she'd show him how. So he left the government service and became a monk. Now, the Buddhist monks in Thailand are part of the Theravada tradition, which requires very severe renunciation in order to purify your mind so that you can do deep meditation. There are some 218 prohibitions, all of which he adopted. Then he even added 10 more of his own, such as never driving in automobiles. This meant that when he had business in Bangkok, about 150 miles away, he'd just pick up his walking stick and start walking. This rigorous training prepared him to do very intensive meditation practice, which allowed him to tune to his deeper and more powerful parts of his mind. When his aunt felt he was ready, she instructed him in the preparation of an herbal diuretic, which she instructed him to give to the addicts, and he started his monastery. When we met him, my most immediate reaction was that I was shaking hands with an oak tree. His presence was immensely powerful and solid. He had us shown through the monastery where some 300 addicts were undergoing treatment. You could really see who was which. The first day arrivals all looked like strung out junkies. They were in one room. Then, further on, by the time they had been there 4 days, you could really see a change. And by 8 days, they seemed cheerful, were bumming cigarettes from me, and seemed really friendly, not particularly like addicts at all. And then, after 10 days, they were gone. And their statistics showed 70% remained free of addiction afterwards. Amazing. When I interviewed the monk, I asked him, "How do you do it?" He said, "Well, it's simple. I tell them that they can only come for 10 days and that they may never come again and that the cure will work." I asked him if he had a lot of religious indoctrination that was included in the 10-day program. "No," he said, "none of that. These people aren't suitable for that." I had heard that many drug experts, media people, and even some congressmen had come from the West, but that none of them could figure out why what he did worked. The herbal brew clearly wasn't the whole ball game. As I hung out with him longer, I began to realize that his mind was so centered and one-pointed that his being was stronger than their addiction. Somehow he conveyed to those addicts a sense of their non-addiction that was stronger than their addiction. And I saw that his commitment was so total that he wasn't just someone using a skill. He had died into his work. He was the cure. He was on a journey until someone kind of told him to do something else. Try something else. Something radically different. Build a Buddhist monastery and invite addicts to stay there for 10 days and give them this tea. Now, clearly the tea wasn't curing them, but there's something sacred about the space. Sacred about him. Sacred about the process that was created there. Definitely something that was off the beaten path, right? Definitely a different idea, a different strategy. Life's a journey, not a destination. That's so cliche, we probably roll our eyes when we hear someone say something like that. But it is worth noting that our encounters with the divine often occur when we're least prepared for them. Like at an AA meeting, hearing people cuss and God, right? We can see God's activity in the world in a lot of weird places. So my question for you is, where do you see God's activity? Because it's really easy to miss while we're so busy and distracted in our world. It's also really easy to miss when we're not living out of a sense of gratitude. Search for it. Find places that are off the beaten path. And don't just give the easy answers like say, I see God working in church on Sunday. I see God working in my family at home. How about the places in between? Because there's a lot of places in between. Do you see God in the chicken coop? Do you see an angel kissing the man asleep on the park bench? Do you see a stairway to heaven next to the meth house? Do Led Zeppelin proud and look for that stairway to heaven everywhere you go along your way. Today, this week, and forever. Amen.